Thank you, everyone. 5:30 p.m. Saturday evening. The masterclass opens. We are reading from the book, The Courage to Be Happy. Last week's recap: violence as an immature communication strategy. So, what happens in a class? There is something known as seeking attention on basic terms. And when the student doesn't get that, the student does everything in the world to make that happen. So, what happens here when the teacher is not able to control the first stages of anger? The students communicate with violence. And there are various levels of violence which build up. So, last time we discovered that violence is not perhaps the best means of communication. And it can only be overcome when you foster self reliance in young adults or in students. So, if you like to catch up and see that violence is an anger, it's an emotion which pulls people apart, and how do you overcome a scenario like that? At the first stage, the teacher can do it, but at the later stage, you need a third person. Why? Because in the class, the teacher and the student have a one to one relationship. The third person is outside the class. The third person will then fairly listen to both and hopefully take an objective decision. If that doesn't work, you go to a counselor. If that doesn't work, then of course you have to go for external help. So that's where we were, and we will read on from here. So we are talking now from the principle of competition to the principle of cooperation. So when you were talking about violence and when you were talking about what we were just saying, there's a competition between the two stakeholders. So how do you get them to cooperate? The objective of education is self-reliance, and the educator is a counselor. At the beginning, the youth had understood these two terms by the conventional definitions and had not given them much thought. As the discussion progressed, however, his doubts with regard to his own educational policy had grown rapidly. Youth is the teacher who has come to talk to a philosopher. Is my law and order maintaining approach all wrong? Have I been fearing and standing in the way of my students? Self reliance? No, there's no way. I've been supporting their self reliance all along. There's no doubt about it. The philosopher, sitting before him silently, stroked his fountain pen. Look at him, so aloof and triumphant. The youth wet his rough lips with coffee and began to speak in a tormented voice. So the focus now is negate praise based development. This is the standard way we work in a class where we feel by giving stars, by giving praises, by giving a pat on the back, you will do good for the individual. And by rebuking or by punishing him, you will perhaps urge him to correct himself. But both ways you have to think now. Negate praise based development. So we have a student here and we have teachers here. Both think, I'm sure, that praise is the best way or the best incentive or the best reward. So, youth, the teacher says, the educator must not be a judge, but rather a counselor who is always there for the child. And rebuking is a form of conduct that only reveals one's own immaturity and gives rise to contempt. The final objective of education is self reliance, and one must not stand in the way of that path. All right. For the time being, I will accept that one must not rebuke, but only if you acknowledge my next question. And your next question is, We often discuss with colleagues and parents whether rebuke based child rearing and praise based child rearing are right or wrong. So, to my dear student who's here, child rearing is bringing up a child. So, when you bring up a child, you have to punish and you have to reward. So, we are trying to see what is good for the student we have here and what is also good for the teachers we have here. It goes without saying that rebuke based child rearing is unpopular. So, if a child gets punished too often, it's not the best way to do it. This is likely due to the trends of our time, and there are many people who reject it from a moral standpoint. I agree with the standpoint myself for the most part, as I have no desire to rebuke. On the other hand, praise based child rearing has an enormous following. Practically no one renounces it directly. So the philosopher says, I suppose that is so, youth. However, Adler goes as far as to renounce praise. 3 years ago, when I asked why, your answer went something like this: praising is the passing of judgment by a person of ability or a person of no ability, and its goal is manipulation. And therefore, that one must not praise. So when you praise a child or when you offer a reward to a child, it is manipulation. It's a shortcut. So let's see what goes ahead. So are we going to take a shortcut or a long cut? Yes, I did say that, the philosopher says. I believe that and I practice no praising education faithfully. However, this only lasted until my mistake was noticed by a certain student. By a certain student? It was several months ago, one of the worst problem children in our school handed in a book report he had written. It was an open assignment for summer vacation. And to my astonishment, he had gone and read Camus, The Stranger. So Camus is an author, Albert Camus, and the book is The Stranger. So child has read that book. Moreover, I was astonished by what he had written about the book. It was quite a wonderful essay, brimming with the fresh sensibilities that only a sensitive boy going through puberty could possess. So puberty is growing up teen years. Once I had read it, before I knew what I was doing, I praised him. I said, Hey, great work. I had no idea you could write such a fine composition. It's changed my opinion of you. I see. The moment I said it, I knew I had messed up. Those words, it's changed my opinion of you, in particular, were filled with that judgment from above that Adler talks about. I guess you could say that I was belittling him. So it's important now to pause here. When you praise someone for something as simple or small, you're actually not being fair to the full potential of the person. And that's why this whole story was belittling him. Yes, because those words would not have come out otherwise. So, regardless, I'd actually praised him. Moreover, I had done so with words of undisguised judgment. Now, what kind of expression do you think this problem child had on his face upon hearing those words? Was he repelled? Ah, if only I could show you the face he made. He gave me such a smile, the likes of which he had never shown me before. The smile of a truly pure and innocent boy. Philosopher. Hey, hey, youth. It just felt like my head had been in a fog, and now it was clearing before my eyes. And I said to myself, what is up with Adler anyway? Thanks to getting caught up in this quackery, I've been giving my an education that could only take away such a smile. such joyfulness. What kind of education is that? So the youth is questioning the philosopher for advising him not to praise and rebuke. So then you started praising. Yes, of course. I praise without hesitation. Not only him, but the other students too. And when I did that, they seemed pleased with it and they made progress with their schoolwork. The more I praised them, the more drive they exhibited. I could only think of it as a positive cycle of growth, philosopher. And you were getting excellent results. Youth, yes. But I wasn't just praising all of them indiscriminately, of course. I praised them according to their level of effort and success. Because if I did otherwise, the compliments would just be lies. That problem child who wrote the book report is a review, is a total bookworm now. He just reads tons of books and writes essays on them. It's really wonderful, isn't it? How books can open up one's world. I imagine that pretty soon the library room at school won't satisfy him anymore. And he'll start going to the university library, the library where I used to work. So this is very interesting how books can open one's world. And that's why we are here. So when you start exploring books, it's proven that your metacognition improves. And when I see people who read, I assure you they will lead. Just this morning, the Prime Minister gave a quote in the newspaper. There's a book fair on in Dehradun, where it says that citizens who read are the citizens who lead. I found that very simple. And it's very much to what we say every day, read and lead. Thank you for being with us. Let's move on. If he does, that would be quite impressive. So which means once the student goes from library to library and starts reading, that would be quite impressive. So then it goes, I know, I'm sure you'll dismiss this. You will say it's a demand for admiration and the first stage of problem behavior. But you know, the reality is completely different. Even if his goal at the outset wasn't to receive praise, soon enough he would have discovered the joy of learning and the pleasure of accomplishment himself. And I'm sure he'll finish school and head out into the world on his own 2 feet. So that leads to what Adler calls self-reliance. Can you really say so for sure? Please acknowledge this clearly. Whatever you may say, due to the praising, the students regained their smiles and their ambition. This is an education I'm giving with all the heat of my body and soul to flesh and blood human beings living in the real world. And Adler's education, what warmth is there? What smiling faces? Well, let's think about it together. Why do we stick to the principle of one must not praise in the education setting? There are children who enjoy the benefit from being praised. So why must not one not praise? What are you risking by engaging in praise? I wonder what quibble you are coming up with next. Look, I am not going to make any concessions. If you are going to revise your arguments, now is the time. So youth feels that his methodology of praising is the best methodology. So the risk of that is if you don't praise, then the young person or the student thinks negatively. Now that's the challenge. जब आप मीठा खाते हो ना, आपको मीठा और बढ़ाते चले जाते हो, मीठा और मीठा लगता चले जाता है. So it's this sweetness of honey which kind of entrances you. So getting praises every time, that sometimes leads to anyone becoming at a plateau. And that's the challenge. Reward gives rise to competition. So let's see what reward does. Philosopher, earlier I brought up the subject of the classroom being a democratic nation. You remember, right? Haha, when you started calling people fascist, how could I forget? Philosopher. So let me explain what fascist is. Fascist is a person who thinks no end of himself, who leads from the front, and always feels he's in command and always right. He's not willing to listen to anyone. And then he's got dictator tendencies. So you get examples in history. I don't want to name any person, but I'm sure you can discover and find out more about fascists. Philosopher. Then I made the point that an organization that is under the command of a dictator cannot escape corruption. When we think a little more deeply about why this is so, the reason one must not praise should become clear as well. So youth is getting curious. Do tell. In a community that has a dictatorship in place instead of an established democracy, all rules regarding what is right and wrong are determined by the sole description of the leader. This is the case of for nations, of course, the corporate entities as well. It happens everywhere in a family, in a classroom, everywhere this happens, where you have one person, I'm the boss. And it is the same for families and schools too. The rules in such communities are applied in a quite arbitrary manner. Ah, companies with top-down management, such are the epitome of that. Now, though one might think that dictatorial leaders are despised by their citizens, this is not always the case. Actually, there are probably more instances in which they enjoy their citizens' ardent support. Why do you think this is so? Because the leader has some charismatic appeal. No, that is not why. That is only secondary, superficial reason. The main reason is the presence of a cutthroat system of reward and punishment. Oh, how so? One is severely punished for breaking rules and praised for obeying them, and one is recognized. In other words, the people are not actually obeying out of support for the leader's character or his thoughts and beliefs, but simply because they have the goal of being praised or not being rebuked. Well, sure, that's just how the world is. Now, here is the problem. In that community where people gather with the goal of being praised, competition emerges. One finds it vexing when others are praised, and one is proud of being praised oneself. One is always concerned with how to be praised first and more frequently than everyone else. And beyond that, with how to have a monopoly on the leader's favor. In this way, the community comes to be controlled by a principle of competition for reward. So, this is how competition happens. Everyone's heading to get that reward of praise from the dictator. Youth, you are just beating around the bush. So, you don't like competition. Is that it? Philosopher, do you accept competition? I accept it wholeheartedly. It seems to me that you are focusing only on the negative aspects of competition. Think of it more broadly, whether it is in our schoolwork, our arts and sports events, or in our economic activities. Once we enter society, it is due to the presence of our rivals keeping up the pace beside us that we continue to step up our efforts. The principle of competition lies at the very root of the power that pushes our society forward. Philosopher. Is that so? When children are placed within the principle of competition and driven to contend with others, what do you think happens? One's competitor is one's enemy Before long, the children start to adopt a lifestyle in which they believe that all other people are my enemies and people are always looking for chances to tick me and must never be underestimated. Why do you think so pessimistically? So, youth is questioning the philosopher. You have no idea the degree to which the existence of a rival acts as a stimulus for human growth, nor the degree to which a rival can be a close friend one can rely on. I guess you spent all your days absorbed in the philosophy and lived a lonely life without close friends or rivals. I'm starting to feel pity for you. I accept wholeheartedly the value of having a sworn friend whom one may call a rival. However, there is no need whatsoever for one to compete with the rival, and one must not compete with him. You accept rivals, but not competition. Oh, my, you're contradicting yourself already. So, this banter is going on between the youth and the philosopher. We are talking what competition means, what rivalry does, and where we end up in a dog eat dog world. So, I'm using that cliched sorry, phrase that you may have come across. So, let's see what happens in a world without competition. The disease of the community, philosopher. There is no contradiction or anything of the sort. Try to think of life as a kind of marathon. There are rivals running beside you, as this itself may act as a stimulus and feel reassuring. It does not present any problems. However, the moment one intends to defeat that rival, the situation changes completely. The goal at the outset, which should be have been completing the race or running fast, transformed into a goal of defeating that person. The rival, who should have been one's sworn friend, turned into an enemy who must be crushed. And this brings out all manner of gamesmanship with regard to winning and even results in interference and unfair conduct. So you have to win by hook or crook. Even after the race is over, one is unable to celebrate the victory of one's rival, and one struggles with feelings of envy and inferiority. Youth. And that's why competition is unacceptable. Whenever there is competition, gamesmanship and unfairness arise. There is no need to defeat someone. If one can complete the race, isn't that enough? No way. You are so naive. You are naive if you have notions like that. Then let's stop using this marathon example and get back to real society. Unlike a marathon in which people vie for the best time in a community run by a dictatorial leader, there is no clear criteria for winning. In a classroom, there are aspects besides schoolwork that can inform one's decision. As long as the judgment criteria are unclear, the world will be rampant with people who hold their comrades back, take credit for other people's work, and flatter their leaders so as to gain recognition only for themselves. You witness this kind of thing even in your workplace, haven't you? Oh, I guess so. In order to prevent such situations from arising, an organization must implement a real democracy that is without reward and punishment and without competition. Please consider that educating by trying to manipulate people with reward and punishment is an attitude that could not be any further removed from democracy. Youth. Then tell me this, what do you think democracy is? What kind of organization or community would you call democratic? Philosopher. A community that is run not on the basis of the principle of competition, but on the principle of cooperation. So we are moving to cooperation now because we have tried today to understand the difference between an era of competition to an era of cooperation. The principle of cooperation. Put cooperation with others above all else instead of competition with others. If you can learn to run your classroom according to the principle of cooperation, your students are likely to adopt a lifestyle in which they see people are my comrades. Haha, let's get along and do our best. This sort of pipe dream that doesn't hold water even in kindergartens today. Suppose there is a boy student who has engaged repeatedly in problem behavior. Many educators would think to themselves, what should I do about this student? They would think about whether they should praise, rebuke, or ignore the boy, or if they should take some other approach. And then they would summon him to the teacher's room and deal with him individually. But this way of thinking is wrong. How so? The problem here is the principle of competition pervading the entire classroom. Not that the boy got involved in problem behavior because he was bad. If he had pneumonia, for example, he would not be that he is suffering from pneumonia as an individual, but that the entire classroom had a serious case of it from outside. His problem behavior has appeared as a symptom of that. This is the way of thinking of Adlerian psychology. So, Adlerian psychology is very analytical and it questions why the problem behavior happens, not you treat the problem behavior and a symptom and treat it. So, when we get medicine from a doctor, the doctor takes basic parameters and gives you a medicine. But when doctor has a conversation with you, doctor gets some tests done from you, he does things analytically, he understands why you are feeling unwell. So here's an example and we move on. A sickness of the entire classroom. Yes, it is a disease called the principle of competition. What is needed of educators is to look at the community in which the problem behavior is occurring, not at the individual who is engaging in it. So you have to look at the whole classroom, not just one person. And then instead of attempting to treat the individual, to go about treating the community itself. So we are trying to encourage how a cooperative environment can help handle problem behavior. How does one treat an entire classroom that has pneumonia? So that's a very nice one. One stops engaging in reward and punishment and continually nips competition in the bud. One rids the classroom of the principle of competition. That is the only way. That would be impossible and have the opposite effect. Have you forgotten that I've already tried no praising education and failed? Yes, I know. At this point, let's step back for a moment and take stock of our discussion points. First of all, the competition principle. To compete for strength and rank always results in vertical relationships because it creates winners and losers and the hierarchical relationships that exist between them. Okay. The horizontal relationships advocated by Adlerian psychology, on the other hand, are imbued with the principle of cooperation. One does not compete with anyone, and there is no winning or losing. It does not matter if there are differences in knowledge and or experience or ability between oneself and others. All people are equal, regardless of scholastic achievement or work performance. And it is in the very act of cooperating with others that building community has meaning. So, this is what you are talking about when you refer to a democratic nation. Yes, Adlerian psychology is a horizontal, relationship based psychology of democracy. So let's move on to the next chapter. Life begins from incompleteness. So we're trying to analyze how we handle behavior and why this particular behavior happens. The behavior happens because of competition. How do we overcome it? With cooperation. Youth, all right. The points of conflict are clear. You are saying that it is not a problem of the individual, but of the whole classroom. The principle of competition permeating the classroom is the root of all evil. I, on the other hand, focus on the individual. Why is that? Well, to borrow a word, it's respect. Each and every student with his unique personality, exists as a splendid human being. There are all kinds of students, some quiet and well behaved, some noisy and bright, some serious, and some with fiery temperaments. They are not a gathering without individual traits. Of course, that's true. But you, even as you talk about democracy, are trying not to look at each of the children individually and instead view them only as a group. Moreover, you are preaching. Everything will change if we change the system. That's more communist than anything else. My view is different. It doesn't matter to me what the system is, democratic or communist or whatever. I deal with the pneumonia of each individual, not the pneumonia of the entire classroom. So, pneumonia is a sickness. So, he says, I deal with each sick individual separately. So, the philosopher says, because that is what you have always done. So, concretely speaking, how do you treat the pneumonia? So, how do you treat every individual of sickness? This is another point of conflict. My answer is with approval, by fulfilling their needs for approval. Hmm, I get it. I really get your denial of the need for approval, but I actually accept it. This conclusion is one I have arrived at based on first hand experience. So, it is not something I will concede easily. In their search for approval, these children are sick in the lungs and numb with cold. So that's the reason. The basically for your approval, the teacher's approval, they are behaving the way they are behaving. Could you explain the reasoning behind your conclusion? In Adlerian psychology, you deny the need for approval. Why is that? It is because, as a result of his hopes of being accepted by another, a person under the sway of the need for approval will, before he knows it, be living a life that conforms to that other person's wishes. Very simple. In other words, he'll be living another person's life. So, to please the other person, you will like to live like the other person. You see that in a home, you see that in a family. You want to please your mom because you want chocolates, you want to please your dad. So you start imbibing your dad and mom. The other day, someone walked up to me and said that I even look like my mom. I think this is where the whole story lies. So we start becoming like the other person and we lose our individuality. Now, this is the challenge. Do we need to lose our individuality or do we need to fulfill someone's expectations? Let's go on. But a person does not live to fulfill someone else's expectations. Whether that person is one's parent or one's teacher or someone else, one must not choose a way of living that fulfills that person's expectations. Do I have it right? Yes. Being constantly concerned about how one is judged by others, one can no longer live one's own life. It becomes a way of living that is no longer free. We have to be free. And if one hopes to find freedom, one must not seek approval. This understanding is not mistaken, is it? No, it is not mistaken. It's a wonderful, truly courageous story. But we can't be tough enough, unfortunately. Even you, if you were to observe the real everyday situation with the student, you understand. They put everything they have got into acting tough, but inside they are terribly insecure. They just don't seem to be able to get any confidence in themselves and they suffer feelings of inferiority. They need approval from other people. It's exactly as you say. Don't agree so flippantly, you outdated Socrates. Look, the kind of people you're talking about are just David statues. So let me pause on this particular dialogue. So the youth is a little flustered and he says, philosopher, you Socrates are outdated. And you are talking as if it's about just David statues. So explore what are David statues. Let's see what it means as we go ahead. David statues. Yes, You know, Michelangelo's statue of David, right? Is the real representation of the human body, all perfectly proportioned and muscular, without an ounce of flab to be found. But it's a supreme ideal image that is devoid of flesh and blood, not a human being that exists in reality. Real life people get stomach aches and bleed. You're always talking about people as if they are the statue of David ideal. Haha, that's an interesting way of putting it. What I'm focusing on, however, is actually living people. I'm talking about sensitive, highly individualistic children who are awkward and thin skinned in every way. I have to fulfill that need for approval for each one of them individually and in a more healthy manner. In a word, I have to praise them. If I don't, they won't be able to regain the courage they have lost. You wear the mask of a man of virtue, but you keep the weak at arm's length. You got idealistic theories of the heroic and the lion-hearted, but nothing for real people. So philosopher replies, I see. Though my words may have sounded like impractical, idealistic theories, that was not my intention. Philosophy must be an inquiry that is firmly grounded with the consciousness that the ideals we pursue are just this ideals. Let us take another angle to consider the reasons that Adlerian psychology does not accept the need for approval. Oh, trying to justify everything just like Socrates. The term you just brought up, feelings of inferiority, is key. Hmm. You want to talk about feelings of inferiority? Okay, I'm an expert on feelings of inferiority, you know. First of all, during childhood, all humans without exception live with feelings of inferiority. This is just a premise of Adlerian psychology. Without exception. That's right. The human being is probably the only living thing with a body that takes longer to grow than the mind. While with other creatures, mind and body develop at the same speed. Only in human does development of the mind happen first, while that of the body lags behind. In a sense, we are creatures who live bound hand and foot, because through our minds, though our minds are free, our bodies are not. Hmm, that's an interesting viewpoint. As a result, human children have to struggle with the gap between the what I want to do, mental aspects, and what I can do, physical aspects. There are things that the adults around them can do, but they cannot. That shelf where the adults put things is out of reach to them. Those stones the adults can carry, they cannot. And the subjects of the adults' conversations are not things they can talk about. Children experience this sense of powerlessness, or one might say incompleteness of self, and as such a rule, cannot help have feelings of inferiority. So they start their lives as incomplete beings. Yes, of course, children are not incomplete as people. It is only that the growth of their bodies has not caught up with that of their minds. But then the adults look only at their physical needs and start to baby them. They do not try to look at the children's mind. So it is only natural that the child suffers feelings of inferiority. Because even though their minds are no different from the adult's minds, the human worth is not being recognized. Youth. All people start out as incomplete beings. So everyone experiences feelings of inferiority. That's a pretty pessimistic point of view. It is not all that bad. This feeling of inferiority, rather than being a handicap, has always been a stimulus of growth, effort, and growth. How so? If human legs were as fast as horses, the horse drawn carriage would never have been invented, and probably not the motor vehicle either. If we could fly like birds, the aeroplane would never have been invented. If we had fur like polar bear, winter clothing would never have been invented. And if we could swim like dolphins, there would never have been a need for boats or marine compasses either. Civilization is a product of the need to compensate for the biological weakness of the human being. And the history of the human race is the history of its triumphing over its inferiority. So, this is how innovation happens with human needs. It's because we humans were weak that we are able to build up such a civilization. That's right. And to extrapolate further, it is due to the weakness that humans create communities and live in relationships of cooperation. Ever since the hunter gatherer age, we have lived in groups and cooperated with our comrades in hunting animals and raising children. It isn't that we wanted to cooperate with each other, it is that we were weak, so desperately weak that we could not live separately. It is due to that weakness that humans form groups and build society. So, our power and our civilization are the fruits of our weakness. Philosopher. Put the other way around. Nothing is scarier to the humans than isolation. Isolated people have not only their physical security threatened, but their mental security as well. Because instinctively, we are well aware that we cannot live alone. As a consequence, we are always longing for a strong connection with other people. Do you understand what this fact means? No. What does it mean? All people have community feeling inside them inherently, and it is something that is deeply linked to human identity. Oh, just as one would not imagine a turtle without a shell or a giraffe with a short neck, there is no such thing as a human being who is completely cut off from other people. Community feeling is not just something that is attained, but something that one digs up from within oneself, which is why it can be shared as a feeling. As Adler elucidates, community feeling is always a reflection of weakness of the body and one from which we cannot be separate. Let's flash this. This is good, worth noting. A community feeling resulting from human weakness. Human beings are physically weak, but the human mind is second to none, much stronger than what of any other animal. I am sure you know well enough the degree to which spending one's days in competition with one's comrade is against the principle of nature. Community feeling is not some head in the clouds ideal, it is a fundamental principle of life that resides with us humans. Community feeling, the key concept of Adlerian psychology, which he had struggled so long to grasp and whose inner truth had been uncomfortable, was now as clear as day to him. It is because of their physical weaknesses that humans create community and live in relationship of cooperation. Human beings always seek connection with other human beings. Community feeling exists inherently in everyone's minds. The philosopher, in saying, dig up your own community feeling and seek connection with other people. With difficulty, the youth ventured a question. Thank you for being with us this evening. This is our bookmark. Let's push it where we should. So here we are. So we will read next week from the My Good School retreat. We are in Jaipur next week, so you will not see the familiar background of the studio which you see every week. On 11th April, 11th April, we will be at Mayur School, Jaipur, and we'll go ahead with the courage to be myself. Very interesting. At the retreat, we will be discovering the courage to be myself. I think it's quite axiomatic that we are heading to a retreat to discover ourselves. Manisha, good for you and good for the people who are going to be there. And let me get back. Thank you, Shalini. God bless you. Thank you, Kabir. Thank you, Vishaka. You are the most loved one and most regular. Thank you, Minakshi, for always being there. And my most loved one, Manisha, God bless you. Is there
Thank you, sir.
is there anything anyone wants to ask me? I'm happy to answer. Consider me as a youth plus philosopher, if I may have the audacity to say that. Any question?
So people generally say that when your work is done, you feel relaxed. But mostly what I've observed, it becomes opposite. When you don't have a work, you're more stressed out. So why exactly these things happen?
Yeah, this is a very interesting question. So, having work or not having work, that you're competing with yourself. And that's where you have to understand. You don't always have to compete with yourself. You have to cooperate with yourself. And when you learn to cooperate with yourself, you won't end up in a situation like this. And when I mean cooperating with yourself, do understand your physical ability, do understand your mental ability, do understand your limited breath, do understand the limited time you have to execute so much. I think that should partly answer your question. Beyond that, I'm uneducated.
No,
Uh,
no, thank you so
we
much.
feel isolated when we have less work. The isolation part, physical isolation, that would, we are all by ourselves. So
Yes,
that is one thing that leads to the insecurity of being alone. That's
beautiful.
how I see it according to the last few pages that you have read.
Yeah, beautifully. I mean, you interpreted the summary in a beautiful way that this insecurity or inferiority, that's the word they have used in the section. It's inferiority, Meenakshi. So inferiority and insecurity could be similar because if you feel inferior, you will feel insecure. And that's the whole idea. So I only just want to stop here and say, please take a pause, take a breath, and then take the next step. On that note, it's been a wonderful evening and we will continue reading. The bookmark is there on your WhatsApp chat. Enjoy yourself. Have a great Sunday. Join Manisha's Sunday school tomorrow at 12. It's at 10:30 a.m. They are reading. Manisha, what books are you reading tomorrow?
Uh, that's the Hindi book Ruskin Bond and What You Want is there in the library.
Yeah, the Ruskin Bond Hindi book is The Whistling Schoolboy. We are approaching the last few chapters of The Whistling Schoolboy. And what you are looking for is in the library is a fascinating book which Jugjeev sir is reading. So tomorrow you will meet Manisha and Jugjeev sir in the Sunday school, 10:30 a.m. That's the next place you should go to. Thank you again, Shalini, and good to have you back.
Thank you so
Take
much. It was a pleasure listening to you.
no, always welcome, and I'm looking forward to meeting you.
So am I. Thank you.
Safe travels. So next week, Shalini, we'll read together. You can be the youth and I can be the philosopher.
Fair enough. I would love to do that.
Lovely. Looking forward to that. Have a
Thanks.
great week ahead and make the most of early April before the weather warms up. It's brilliant and pleasant April. Enjoy it. Don't make a fool of yourself. Bye bye.